Bhaktivinode says that material examples are absolutely necessary for the explanation of spiritual ideas. For example, in the 10th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says things such as, "Among the stars I am the moon, in living beings I am consciousness, of senses I am the mind, of immovable things I am the Himalayas." So many examples of material things are used where Krishna says, "I am this, I am that." So Krishna is explaining how he is pervading everything and is the essence of everything great. All we have available to us are material examples. We're embodied in a material body, we live in a material world, and this is all we've known since birth. So how can we use anything else but material examples? This has been true throughout the ages, not only today. Nature as it is before our eyes must explain the spirit, or else the truth will remain ever concealed. Bhaktivinode Thakur continues, natural devotion follows the idea of panentheism, that everything is in Goddess and Goddess is in everything. This goes along with what Krishna was saying in the 10th chapter of the Gita. And so this is nothing unusual or fantastic that I'm making up about seeing Krishna in material things or seeing Radha in a beautiful woman. These are the examples that have been used throughout the ages. All spiritual ideas are similarly pictures from the material world because matter is the dictionary of spirit. We can see how the world works, we can see how relationships between people work, we can see what a healthy community is like. The spiritual world is actually the ideal vision of material life. How can we imagine living eternally in a state of bliss and consciousness and enjoy every day in that spiritual eternity? What are the occupations and playful things we'll be doing with ourselves and others for eternity? How do we imagine that to be? Well, I think that's based on the relationships and experiences we have in this world. What else do we have to depend on? Now, if you're a Vaishnav, you may say, well, we have the scriptures, we have the Bhagavat Puran that describes the spiritual world, that describes what Braj is like. But what do you think those descriptions consist of? More examples from the material world that are used to describe the spiritual world. Radha and Krishna are the idealized human couple, lovers, and their love is considered to be really more important than them. The relationship they have and the love they share is the highest manifestation of the divine. But this concept of the divine being a young, handsome man who's an excellent lover and a hero, and Radha being a beautiful young woman who's very talented in culinary arts and in pleasing Krishna and in arranging so many wonderful things for the happiness of everyone. These things are an ideal of what we would wish to see in this life. So we can only imagine now what that might be like in the next life, because we see there are so many obstacles in this life to attaining the ideal we would have, that maybe in the next life, in the spiritual world, where everything consists of pure spiritual energy or consciousness, where the presence of the divine is not so covered over like it is here in this world, making it difficult to see Radha-Krishna's presence in this world. But yet we can learn to uncover that spiritual world within this world. There are many ways we are able to do this by starting to live according to the ideals we value in the spiritual world, for one thing. Treating everyone we encounter in a loving manner and dealing with things fairly and justly in a friendly manner so that good social relationships exist in this world as well as in the next. Fairness in our economic dealings with others, loving people genuinely and not exploiting them and using them for our own selfish ends. These are just some of the things that can help us manifest the spiritual world in this life. And then there are other ways we can use the things in this life to further our spiritual life. For example, one great associate of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was Ramananda Roy, and he used to be a governor, and he retired with the blessings of the king he worked for to support Chaitanya and to engage in devotional practices with him. And what was one of Ramananda Roy's main practices? Every day he would get together with a couple of dancing girls in his garden and bathe and dress them, practicing for his role, bathing and dressing Radha in the spiritual world. Because in the spiritual world, he's a girlfriend of Radha's. It just so happens that I have also chosen the same service of bathing and dressing Radha for my spiritual body also. And so I'm not able to hire dancing girls and such to do these practices. But over the years since then, it's developed into a mental process of visualization, so that we learn to visualize the spiritual world we want within. We can use various tools to help us in that. I find videos and things of that nature that portray scenes that are conducive to the spiritual vision I have as good meditation tools. So we can learn to use material things to see spiritual things. It's a matter of being able to just adjust the consciousness so that we just alter the perception slightly, so we don't see things from a material perspective, but from a spiritual perspective, because we see ourselves as intimate girlfriends of Radha-Krishna on the spiritual platform. So why would we behave in a way other than that in this world? Bhaktivinode continues to say that there's an unfailing connection between truth and shadow. The material world is simply a modification of the spiritual world. The spiritual energy becomes covered over by what the Indians call Maya, and what we may translate as illusion. So we have to pierce through the illusion like piercing through a cloud covering so that we can see the sun and the brightness and infinite sky above us. In the same way, when we pierce through the cloudy conditioning and all the dirt that's collected in our minds, keeping us from seeing the truth, from seeing the divine. Just like when we clean our glasses, we have to improve our vision, develop spiritual vision, so we learn to see Krishna in everything. Just like Plato gave the example of the people who lived in a cave and only saw the movement of reality outside the cave by shadows projected on the wall. In the same way, this whole world is like a shadow projection of the spiritual world. The things that are in the spiritual world are also here. Only here they're corrupted by the modes of passion and ignorance, which make us selfish and make things deteriorate, and the effects of time, birth, death, disease, and old age, they make a mess of things. In the spiritual world, it's beyond time and space, beyond birth, death, disease, and old age, beyond illusion. Everyone is enlightened and everything is conscious. If we could only see it, that would be true here too, but our consciousness is too covered over, or we'd see, as Krishna says, I am of senses the mind. In living beings, I am consciousness. So Krishna is there within us. Radha is there within us. And when we learn to see them in our life, in our consciousness, both internally and externally, then we'll have developed some self-realization. And that's what this is all about. Self-realization. Don't just take my word for it. Try the practices that I recommend and see if they work for you. The ones that do, continue doing them. The ones that don't, leave them. That's what I do. There are 64 devotional practices listed in the traditional writings, but you only need to do one in order to be successful in your devotional service. This is more based on grace than it is on our works. So don't think, well, I'm so inept and unable to do this. How will I do it? Goddess will fill in the gaps for us so we're able to do it. They want us to be in relationship with them as much as we want to, probably more, or we wouldn't be here. Now, if we can learn to develop our desire for them, that will be great. That's all it takes, just that yearning and longing to be in the spiritual world as we envision it. We don't have to accept an Indian concept of the spiritual world of Braj as the Bhagavat Puran portrays, because we understand that's how Indians, Hindus, saw the spiritual world around 800 CE and wrote about it in the Bhagavat Puran. That was their vision. Because no matter how pure a mystic's spiritual experience is, someone named Vyas, which is really a term for anonymous or author, had a vision that may have been the purest vision of the spiritual world, but yet he had to record it and transmit it based on the material environment in which he lived, the language he used, the culture he lived in. Bhaktivinode even pointed out how the Bhagavat Puran must have been written in southern India, because in one place it recommends eating bitter foods at the end of the meal. In the north of India, They like to eat bitter foods at the beginning and sweets at the end. So he could tell, oh, this is a Southern Indian writing. Even the sages show favoritism to their own home place. And so we can also show favoritism to our own home place. Now, I'm from Brooklyn. I don't want to be in heaven that's anything like Brooklyn, let me tell you. But now I live in the jungle of Hawaii, and it's much closer to my vision of Braj. And I think of how I want Braj to be, and it's not based on Indian customs and dress and the things that you read about in the Bhagavat Puran and other Vaishnav writings. It's based on what is the ideal place we'd like to live in, and how can we function in that place in a way that corresponds to our innate spiritual nature. That's what natural devotion is all about, bringing out that innate spiritual nature of devotion to Radha-Krishna. How do we want to see them? How do we want to be? How would we like to please them? These are the things we need to ask ourselves, and they'll help us. Because, it takes a lot of variety, a lot of new and different experiences with an infinite number of spiritual beings to occupy Radha-Krishna through eternity. So we're serving them by adding the spiritual variety of pastime, and surely they'll give us a spiritual body and a spiritual abode that accommodates the vision and the way in which we desire to serve them. So we're counting on this because these are the actual teachings that Bhaktivinode Thakur passed on through his disciplic succession, and which we're simply repeating here in modern-day terms. Bhaktivinode also calls us to live as servants of Goddess and look to the good of all with disinterested activity. We're not to simply live for ourselves. We're not simply to look after those who belong to the same cult as us, or something of that nature. We're called to look for the good of all. We're called to do some service to the world. Whatever the talents we've been given, we should use them. Teaching is one of my talents. I'm also able to handle technical things such as camcorders and YouTube. So I'm doing a YouTube series. That's my service for the good of all. Some may be called to cultivate a community garden, do community organizing, work for a living wage for everyone, work for peace. There's so many things we can do for the world. That's one of the things that I've added to devotional practices in natural devotion, that being engaged with the world to help this world be a better place for all is part of our service to Radha-Krishna, not just selfishly thinking about what we'll be doing in the next life. So we want to see continual progress in our spiritual holiness and harmony, as Bhaktivinode said. We want to progress in holiness, where we are more and more constantly meditating upon Radha-Krishna, and also harmony, that we are in harmony with ourselves, our inner and outer natures are in harmony. Our relationships within the world are in harmony. Our relationships with the divine are in harmony. And we learn to be in harmony with the flow of life, as the Taoists say, going with the flow of the Tao or the divine as it unfolds day to day. Be sure to like and subscribe.